Good evening, folks. My name is John Flores, and I'm the Dean of the College of Agriculture here at Kansas State University. I'm also the Director of K-State Research and Extension, and I'm very pleased to welcome all of you here today. This is our second Henry C. Gardiner Food Systems Lecture. Creating and running a new lecture series like this one is not an easy task. A large committee of faculty, staff, and students have worked very hard, and I want to take this opportunity to recognize them. Would you please stand, all the members of the committee? Thanks. Scientific and technological developments over the last century transformed our food supply into a global, enormously complex, and extremely sophisticated system that has successfully achieved a safe, nutritious, abundant, and sustainable food supply for healthier people everywhere. However, numerous articles in the popular press, books, movies, TV series, the social media, use compelling arguments with some truths and seductively simplistic, sometimes misleading, approaches to blame science and technology, the industrial agriculture, and the industrial food system for many of the problems that afflict our society today. Nevertheless, projected increases in human population, greater urbanization, changing consumption patterns, and an improved diet indicate that current food production levels must be raised substantially, and production and processing methods must be improved significantly over the next few decades. In addition, our food system faces very serious challenges, including significant food losses and food waste, environmental and climate changes, you will hear more of that in a minute, water shortage and water pollution, soil erosion and nutrient depletion, limited food accessibility and malnutrition, overconsumption and obesity, longer human lifespan and an aging population, food safety concerns, and threats from terrorism. Given these huge challenges that our food system is facing and humanity is looking at today, and the severe criticisms of our modern food system, the question still remains, will we be able to feed 9 to 10 billion people in just a few decades, or more than 11 billion people by the end of the century? Not only feed them, but feed them in a sustainable way. Thus, this was the question that led us to the creation of the Henry C. Gardiner Global Food Systems Lecture Series. The mission of the lecture series is to provide science-based education about the global food system. The series allows university students, faculty, staff, and Kansas citizens to interact with U.S. and international food industry leaders. The Henry C. Gardiner Global Food Systems Lecture Series will bring innovative thought leaders in food and agriculture, science, technology, engineering, business, and policy from academic institutions, private industry, and government in order to present educational, thought-provoking information to the public at Kansas State University. Because approximately 1% of Americans are involved in agriculture, the lecture series will focus on educating the majority of a population unfamiliar with the challenges to ensure safe, nutritious, affordable, high-quality, and plentiful food. A lecture series like this is not possible without people who step forward to share their passion for the global food system and make it possible. 2.5 years ago, a member of the Gardiner family approached me with the idea of establishing a large new lecture series on the Order of the Landon Lecture, which would be aimed at telling the story of what is happening in our global food system from the perspective of various speakers and points of view. The idea of the family was to honor their father and grandfather, Henry C. Gardiner. Our hope is that these lectures, given on the university's campus, will be attended by K-State students, faculty, staff, alumni, agriculture and organization leaders, as well as private citizens and consumers. All of us are involved in the global food system, whether as producers, processors, teachers, researchers, extension faculty and staff, policymakers, or simply as consumers. We all eat food, and the future of our food system should be important to all of us. Our speaker, Mr. Greg Page, works for Cargill Corporation, which is celebrating its 150th anniversary and is heavily invested in Kansas. We congratulate Cargill for the 150 years of success, and as we know, it is hard work for a company to survive, let alone survive for 150 years. In 2015-16, we're celebrating 20 years of Cargill K-State Higher Education Initiative. Cargill has partnered with K-State to provide guidance and assistance to the university's diversity programs, leadership studies, the colleges of agriculture, business, and engineering, plus other areas all across the academy. We're proud to be one of Cargill's main universities it has partnered with. I hope you will enjoy our evening's presentation by one of the world's most prominent company leaders. Now I would like to introduce Mark Gardiner, president of the Gardiner Angus Ranch and a representative of the Gardiner family, which has graciously endowed our new lecture series. The great thing about Mark is that he's a K-Stater and a College of Ag grad. So help me welcome Mark to the podium.
Thank you so much, Dean Flores. God, I love this place. Kansas State University. You know, they said all the nice things about our family and what we did, but we had an idea. We had an idea, and all of you out here, and you talk about our family, and you talk about Kansas State University, and you think back to the Morrill Act of 1863 and the first land-grant university. You think about people coming from the east and moving across the Great Plains of Kansas, and my family actually homesteaded in Clark County, Kansas in 1885, so that means we've survived or endured 130 years there. But it's the story of your families. And you think about Kansas State and you think about, you know, all the things that we have here and the things that we can have. And the reality of Henry Gardiner was his curiosity of his mind. If we have a question, let's seek an answer. And who did we normally call when we needed an answer? But it was Kansas State University. And when they couldn't find an answer, they would work and they would network and they would work all over the world to try to figure out things that we can do to do it just a little bit better. And so when you think about your families and you think about we get together and we talk about feeding 10 billion people, that's quite a few people. That's only 35 years from now. And that doesn't seem very long to a lot of you students here, but I graduated from this institution 32 years ago and it seems like yesterday. But one of Henry Gardiner's statements always was, we can do this. We can do this. So let's discuss the idea, let's have the open discussion, and let's not trade emotion for science. You know, often in agriculture, we apologize for being farmers and ranchers, and we work hard at what we do. But let's educate the world because, ladies and gentlemen, we have to feed the world. And so when you think about the Cargill Corporation and you think about their family and you think about how they've fed the world and how they've helped so many people, not only at Kansas State and Kansas, but all over the world. And you think about Greg Page. He's one of us. He's one of us. He's from the Great Plains of North Dakota. And we're so honored to have him come and speak and talk about the opportunity that we have to make this a better place. And I would call it the K-State way. We can do this. Let's leave this place a little better than we found it. And I'm honored to be here. I'm honored to be a K-Stater. Thank you so much.
Isn't he great? Next, let me introduce you our president, President Kirk Schulz. He's currently our lucky 13th president. Immediately prior to his appointment as president at Kansas State University, he served as vice president for research and economic development at Mississippi State University. He has also served on the faculty of Michigan Technological University and the University of North Dakota. President Schulz is active in the Boy Scouts of America and serves on the executive board of Coronado Council. Kirk also serves various roles on the boards of Commerce Bank of Kansas City, the Greater Manhattan Community Foundation, the Kansas Bioscience Authority, the NCAA Board of Governors, and Division I Board of Directors. President Schulz is active in several professional societies, including the American Institute of Chemical Engineers and the American Society for Engineering Education. In recognition of achievements in the field of chemical engineering, Dr. Schulz was elected fellow in both the American Society of Engineering Education and the American Association for the Advancement of Science. President Schulz will now introduce tonight's future speaker. Please help me welcome President Schulz.
Was this a great evening to be a Wildcat or what? Oh. Let's try that again. Is this a great evening to be a Wildcat or what? Yeah, there we go. Thank you. How exciting is it for us to be attending the second Henry C. Gardiner Global Food Systems Lecture? Welcome to everybody, certainly in our audience, or should I say audiences. We have an overflow room of people in the K-State Student Union watching, plus watch parties at K-State Olathe and K-State Salina. And let me tell you, how many universities have watch parties to watch a lecture on global food systems? Many employees of K-State and Cargill are watching online, as are science and FFA classes across the state of Kansas. So welcome, all of you, to our lecture tonight. Kansas State University is a global leader among universities for our research in animal health, plant science, food safety, and food security. Now we're using our expertise to support the world's food systems. It is only fitting we have a new lecture series dedicated to global food systems. I thank Mark and the Gardiner family for endowing the lecture series and the College of Agriculture, K-State Research and Extension for creating this new series for the university. I also want to emphasize that one person, or in this case, one family, can make a huge difference in our lives and what they have done with their vision to create and endow this preeminent lecture series at Kansas State University. These lectures and events like this are part of what we need so that our College of Agriculture reaches our vision of being a top 5 National College of Ag. Tonight's speaker, Mr. Greg Page, serves as Executive Director of Cargill. He served as Cargill's Chief Executive Officer from June 1st, 2007 to December 1st of 2013. He was elected to the Cargill Board of Directors in August 2000 and elected Chairman of the Board on September 11th, 2007. Page joined Cargill in 1974 as a trainee assigned to the Feed Division. Over the years, he held a number of positions in the United States and Singapore. Greg worked with the startup of a poultry processing operation in Thailand, the beef and pork processing operations of Cargill's Excel subsidiary in Wichita, Kansas, and the financial markets group in Minneapolis. Page serves as a member of the board of directors of Eaton Corporation and John Deere and Company. He is past chair of the board of Big Brothers Big Sisters of America and immediate past president of the Northern Star Council of the Boy Scouts of America, and continues his service on both these boards. Cargill, celebrating its 150th year, provides food, agriculture, financial, and industrial products and services around the world. The company has 155,000 employees in 68 countries. As Mark Gardiner explained, the purpose of this lecture series is to bring leaders in the global food systems throughout the world to present their views. Also, as Mark said, we may not always agree with what our speakers have to say. We know climate change is controversial to some and not to others in our audience, and that's fine. But please listen politely and give our speakers' ideas thoughtful consideration. So now, let's give Greg Page a rousing Wildcat welcome. Greg, welcome to K-State.
Thank you, President Schulz. Good evening. It's great to be here, and it's an honor to have the opportunity to speak to you about climate change and, more importantly, about how our food production system reacts to those changes. But before I begin, I too would like to extend my thanks to the Gardiner family for sponsoring this series, but more importantly, for everything that they have done over the years for the beef industry, for ranchers in terms of productivity, and for increased positive consumer dining experiences. Certainly all of the work they've put into the quality of beef raised in this country raised the level of performance of our entire industry. So my thanks to the Gardiner family. Over the next few minutes, I will share some of my observations and then invite you to question and challenge and put forward your ideas on how best to tackle a significant challenge for the next generation. The challenge itself is clear. We must determine how to feed 9+ billion people by 2050, a group of people who will not only be more numerous, but hopefully more prosperous and almost certainly more urban. We will have to do so with heightened attention to sustainability and the practical limits of our planet's natural resources. And to make matters more complicated, we will have to learn to grow that extra food in the face of a range of possible impacts from climate change. But if the challenge is clear, the responses and the solutions can be a bit murky. Just like Kansas State, Cargill has been attached to and has deep roots in agriculture. Our company is celebrating, as President Schulz said, our 150th anniversary. We're just 2 years younger than K-State. Over the course of those 150 years, the company has faced its share of daunting challenges, beginning with our first investment in a small town, Conover, Iowa, in 1865. With the railroads quickly expanding across America, across the American prairies, Conover became an overnight boom town, and we were there to benefit. There were over 200 buildings in Conover, fresh produce markets, and 32 saloons. Must have been good corn prices. Not too much later, however, the railroad abruptly dismantled its train station, and within a couple of years, Conover was a ghost town. Cargill moved on. Like everyone in this industry, we learned very early on in the life of our company that markets are always changing, and it is we who must adapt. So, a little bit about Cargill. First, we moved crops from time and places of surplus to from places of surplus to times and places of deficit. This core grain trading that many people think of when they hear the name Cargill actually makes up about 25% of Cargill's investments. We also provide farmers at all scales of agriculture across the globe with a variety of production services. We produce a variety of foods, sweeteners, cocoa and chocolate, malt, cooking oils, beef, pork, turkey, a long list of the products that fill grocery stores around the world. We also trade ocean freight, electricity, natural gas, petroleum, basic metals, and currencies. The prices of each of these commodities has a dramatic direct and indirect impact on agriculture. As the President said, Kansas is home to several Cargill businesses. Our North American meat business is headquartered in Wichita. We have a beef processing plant in Dodge City, a feedlot in Leoti, a soybean processing plant and vegetable oil refinery in Wichita, and our salt operations in Hutchinson. In addition, there are a number of Cargill Ag Horizon grain elevators spread across Kansas. At these locations, we receive corn, wheat, milo, beans from farmers and provide a range of services, including grain origination and storage, grain marketing resources, agronomic advice, crop insurance, and crop inputs. Together, these businesses employ 4,100 Kansans at 39 locations. We are also the beneficiaries of an excellent educational foundation that KSU provides. We have more than 500 KSU graduates currently working at Cargill and contributing to our success, and a number of my colleagues are here with me tonight. Kansans know well a lot about what it takes to feed a hungry world. Tonight, I want to talk to you about the potential impacts of a changing climate on the future of food production. It is certainly a fitting time to discuss this topic. This week, the World Food Prize activities in Des Moines will again draw the world's attention to the challenges of feeding the planet. Then at the end of next month, world leaders will convene in Paris to hammer out agreements to reduce global greenhouse gas emissions and start the world on a path, hopefully, to mitigate the most serious threats from climate change. This is also a fitting place to be talking about this topic. As all Wildcats know, Kansas State was the first land-grant institution in the United States. Land-grant universities have historically been important contributors to developing the science, the technology, and the human talent and ingenuity that has enabled the global food system to move the world further from famine than ever before. And I repeat that because it's something that each of us should be proud of. We are further from famine than ever before. All the world's people owe a debt of gratitude to the advances in agriculture, agronomics, animal husbandry, food safety, and food science that our land-grant universities have helped produce. America's agricultural sector should be very proud of the significant advances that have been made, both in productivity and in sustainability. For example, it now takes 33% less nitrogen to produce a bushel of corn versus 30 years ago. No-till farming has helped improve soil fertility, reduce erosion, improve energy use, limit carbon emissions. And farmers have improved feed conversion in hogs by a third during the last generation. Each of these successes has dramatically lowered the greenhouse gas footprint of feeding the world. In the face of the challenges still ahead for our global food system, it is reassuring to see the concentration, of resources, energy, and effort represented right here in Manhattan, Kansas. I'll list just a few: the Biosecurity Research Institute, the Food Science Institute, the International Grain Science and Industry Complex, the USDA ARS Center for Grain and Animal Health Research, the Kansas Department of Agriculture, the Urban Water Institute, and very importantly and exciting to see it beginning, the soon-to-be-built National Bio and Agro Defense Facility, an impressive concentration of intellectual capital right here in Manhattan, Kansas. Among the challenges ahead are those presented by a changing climate. Climate change is not a particularly popular subject in much of the heartland, but at Cargill we have come to believe that it is important to have serious conversations about what we can do now to accommodate a range of climate scenarios and for agriculture to take part in those conversations and in making reasonable preparations. Why? Because of all the things that are challenging about farming under any circumstance become more difficult with a growing population and in the presence of a more quickly changing climate. How much more difficult? A group with which I am affiliated has studied risks associated with the changing climate. The studies from Risky Business bring unique perspective, focusing on the economic risks under a range of scenarios and not focusing on the causes of climate change or on policy prescriptions. So what did the report say? Specific to agriculture, the Risky Business report outlined the shifting agricultural patterns in crop yields that we should expect and prepare for, with likely gains for northern farmers offset by losses in the southern grain belt. The report also showed that without agricultural adaptation, U.S. production of corn, soybeans, wheat, and cotton could decline by 14% by mid-century and by as much as 42% by late century. And again, I restate, this is without adaptation and investments in agriculture. However, the resilience and capacity, adaptive capacity of farmers is real, and it's already in place, and it's already happening. It's evidenced by the myriad ways in which the farm families represented in this room are farming differently than their parents did. I grew up in North Dakota. I was back for a wedding in September and sat with several of my farmer friends. They have the opportunity to grow 30 different crops in North Dakota, far different than when I left in 1969. Much of it is a result of the increase in the number of frost-free days available to them, heightened by the technologies that have been created by land-grant universities like K-State. Cargill has just opened in May of this year a canola processing facility north of the 53rd parallel. Unheard of or unthought of 30 years ago that we would be contemplating an investment of this size that far north, but again showing the adaptive capacity of the Canadian farmers and the willingness of suppliers like Cargill to follow them. Fourth, the temperatures that are predicted in the risky business study are actually lower than the temperatures faced by our corn farming customers in Mato Grosso, Brazil, or in Thailand. And so in many cases, the technology we will need to adapt to the US Midwest are already being tested and put into practice in other parts of the world that face the possible temperatures that we may face here 10, 20, and 30 years from now. In the face of a climate that is likely to become warmer, wetter in some places, drier in others, and more prone to extremes everywhere, how do we preserve and enhance the resilience and adaptive capacity of the global food system? I'd like to review several suggestions. First, embrace the signaling power of price. The foundation of sustainable agriculture is a price adequate to reward farmers for their efforts and to permit their reinvestment. This is as true for commercial smallholders in the developing parts of the world as it is for large farms here in Kansas and elsewhere. Prices are potent fertilizer, signaling and motivating farmers to produce more when the market calls for it. We mask these signals with subsidies, tariffs, and other market distorting mechanisms at all of our peril. But we can't afford to look at commodity prices in a vacuum. Because consumers must have enough purchasing power to create the demand, growth in the wider economy is critically important for agriculture to thrive in both the developed world and in the developing world. Second, honor comparative advantage and enable trust-based free trade. The world's farmers will produce the most food in the most economically and environmentally sound ways when they cultivate the crops best suited to their particular conditions and trade the resulting production with others. Food self-sufficiency is a very tempting idea, but it is not the path to food security. However, many countries too readily default to dreams of self-sufficiency. Export bans exacerbated the food crisis in 2007-8. Russia's ban on wheat exports again in 2011 also caused disruption. Today, in the last 6 months, we've seen Indonesia implement a ban on corn imports in a misguided effort to instantly create self-sufficiency in corn. We've watched as India has put in place a subsidized system to grow palm oil in India, a crop for which they have literally no comparative advantage, as a way to deal with the foreign exchange problem. By contrast, in soybeans, China has set a far better example. China has helped the world in aggregate produce more food through its decision to honor comparative advantage and import soybeans. When China focuses on those areas where it has an advantage, using its scarce land and water to produce corn, wheat, and rice, all of which yield relatively better in China, and then imports soybeans and vegetable oils, which yield relatively poorly in China, the world in total raises more food and at a lower cost. Honoring comparative advantage and embracing open trade are particularly important given the demographic trends ahead. More population growth is expected in regions that are natural food importers, means more food will need to cross borders. Honoring comparative advantage and embracing open trade are also buffers against regional crop failures resulting from extreme weather events, more of which we should expect to see in ensuing years. I think it's an often underreported fact that following the crop failures or crop shortages in 2012 and to a lesser degree in 2013, here in the United States, we imported beans and corn, and in some years both, to help get us through July and August before our new crops came in. And we brought those crops from Brazil. It was an enormous assistance to the cost and to the livelihood of livestock producers in the southeast United States. So this is not simply a third world concept, but one from which the U.S. has already benefited twice in the last 4 years. Third, pursue sustainable intensification. Since 1975, the world's farmers, as the graph shows, have doubled the amounts of grains, rice, and oilseeds that they produce, and they have done it bringing very little incremental land into production. We will continue to need to deliver production increases primarily from productivity improvements. The alternative is to further encroach on the world's native forests and wetlands. It's entirely possible to do this, but not if we turn our backs on proven technologies that enable farmers to produce more with less water, with less fertilizer, with less herbicides, and with less tillage. Fourth, we should tackle climate change head on. Climate change is a devilishly difficult challenge. One wag said, "It is a problem politics is almost perfectly designed not to solve." Nonetheless, we need to tackle that political challenge as well head on. The potential costs are far in the future and uncertain, and the solutions require coordination across scores of countries and industries, each of those countries having wildly disparate economies, agendas, and political systems. Bill Gates has pointed out on more than one occasion that 90% of what the wealthy nations are spending today on carbon-free energy goes into subsidizing things that won't solve the challenge. And only 10% is being spent on the basic research into technologies that might solve the challenge. We collectively must reconsider and rethink this mix. Visiting Cargill about 6 months ago, Risky Business co-founder Tom Steyer called climate change the transcendent issue of our generation. But the profound question that his comment begs is how and how much to spend against an uncertain outcome. That is the essence of risk management. But he, like me, is optimistic that we will rise to the occasion, particularly in the United States, where ingenuity and entrepreneurship impulses and an ability to scale solutions can all be assets in addressing the climate challenge. In that spirit, allow me to recap what I believe will make our global food system more resilient and adaptable to the potential impacts of a changing climate. First, continue to invest in yield growth, in increasing attainable yields through improvements in genetics and agronomic practices. Second, continue to reduce agriculture's environmental impact and to convince consumers that we're serious about doing that by using less water, using less land more efficiently and judiciously, by protecting the soil and water quality, and by adopting practices that enable us to continue sustainable intensification. In doing this, we build upon a proud tradition. Third, discourage political leaders worldwide from pursuing food self-sufficiency, imposing export barriers, and taking other actions that inhibit food from moving freely across international borders. Fourth, favor flexibility in implementing renewable fuel policies so that food crops are not diverted by rigid dictate in periods of poor harvest, and importantly, preserving this tool to support price adequacy in times of surplus. Fifth, let's all be open to collaboration and cooperation. Let's each assume good intent, even on the part of people with whom we disagree, sometimes vehemently. That's the way to enter into the conversations we need to have to make smart decisions about our collective future, pardon me, in the presence of an evolving climate. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you. Okay. Ed McMahon's going to help me now.
So we have plenty of time for questions. We have mics on either side of the auditorium. I would like people to line up behind each one of the mics. One of the things that we're going to ask you to do is to sign a release form, because this is being taped and we're going to have it public. So we need your permission that we can show the question to the public. So with that, we have plenty of time to start with questions, And we have, I believe, one mic is over there, and there's another mic right here in the front. So please come forward. And as you approach the mic, would you please state your name and ask the question?
Dean Flores, if you ask the question on behalf of a friend who's not here, do you have to sign the waiver?
I do, for my friend.
Okay, for you.
So
you can sign your friend's name.
Let's start with the first one.
We hear you.
Hello, my name is David Campbell. My question is, I read recently that Cargill was divesting or getting rid of its interest in the pork industry. I was wondering if you could elaborate on that strategy behind that decision and whether or not there may be any similar overtures on the beef side.
I'll answer the second question first. There are absolutely no overtures on the beef side. We have had for a long time and continue to have, and in fact have continued to make significant investments in our beef business. The decision to divest our pork business is not related to climate change. I think that's important to point out. No, I think in the history of our company, clearly the company, in the 41 plus years that I've been at the company, about 85% of the cash flow has been left in the business by the family that owns us. And so we have had a nonstop history of growth in aggregate in the size and the global footprint of Cargill. That being said, we got out of the hybrid seed business when it went to genetic modification simply because the financial burdens of doing that level of science were more than a family-owned company would be likely to support. And so I say that only to say this is not the first time we've exited a business after a long period of being involved. We found ourselves in the position of being the 5th largest pork packer in a relatively consolidated industry and didn't see a pathway for us to grow our business here or outside of the U.S. So a very difficult decision for me. I spent a big share of my career in the livestock side of Cargill's activities, and any time you part ways with longtime friends, it's tough. But it was a strategic decision that's not inconsistent with what we've done in the past when we find ourselves in an intractable situation.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome, David. I didn't know you had to do that.
You're being a very, very shy audience. I want to see some more questions.
Okay. Yep.
Okay. With such a large amount of agriculture based on fossil fuels in the creation of fertilizers, shipping and cultivating, electricity needed throughout, all involves fossil fuels. Does the industry have a plan to address rising costs of fossil fuels and their impact on food prices? And to that end, how can sustainable initiatives have vested interests in fossil fuels like oil, as you mentioned Cargill trades?
As long as you sign the form, you should ask at least 3 questions. I respect that. So first, clearly, I'll start inside the fences of Cargill. In going back to the 99, our then CEO, who was a K-State graduate, Warren Staley, put us on a path of continuing 5-year plans of compounding reduction in our own greenhouse gas footprint. And we have just now entered into the 15 to 2000, so this is our 4th iteration of those promises. I think the same thing done all across the supply chain is something that everybody should be proud of, whether it's the amount of diesel fuel our tractors consume for a given acre of output I talked about. Just think how much natural gas is saved when you reduce nitrogen fertilizer use by 1/3 in a relatively short period of time, and there's more we can do. And so, to me, the way the world will deal with this problem is in the change behavior, whether they're consumers or industrial companies or farmers, of each of us looking at every element of our footprint and doing the best we can. I will now veer off your question to a subject that bothers me, is we have been relatively unsuccessful in getting the world or even U.S. policy leaders to understand that natural gas is food, because nitrogen is the backbone of whatever we do. It was when we used to grow alfalfa ahead of corn, and so today we simply have the way to turn natural gas into the nutrients for a high production agriculture and sustainable intensification. To me, every time I hear the virtues of burning that natural gas to make something as simple as electricity, I cringe. That can't be the best choice to diminish these resources, which are obviously non-renewing, and to not take more interesting technologies and put them into place for generating our electricity. That if 10 years from today we continue to find the only path to a reduced greenhouse gas footprint is to convert our electricity generation to natural gas, I think we disappoint our children. As to us trading the products, as a business, we confront the world as it exists, that clearly those prices, those trends, those foreign exchange flows are important to understanding our most important business, which is the food business. In total, all of those activities that I mentioned, electricity, natural gas, petroleum, basic metals and currencies, probably represents about 8% of Cargill. I don't say that as a defense. I think the insights that we get from participating in those industries is brought to bear to the benefit of our farm and agricultural and food customers. So I would expect we will continue to do it, because for now it is the available technology and so important to everybody in this room, in this state. Thanks. Thank you.
My name's Cassie Andersen. I only have one question, sorry, but how do you see climate change continuing to impact the discussion on GMOs?
That's actually two questions. Hopefully, it will impact the discussion on climate change. The GMOs will prove a positive, that I think we've done a very poor job. I find in interacting with the friends of my children when they visit our home, that the percentage of them, educated as well as they are, that understand that the use of this technology reduces the amount of burden we place on our wetlands and forests. It reduces the amount of water we use. It reduces the amount of herbicides that we use. It reduces the amount of greenhouse gases that are required to produce a given amount of food. And so if we cannot link this technology with consumers' desire to see a more sustainable food chain, we could lose both ways. We could have a less sustainable agricultural footprint, and we will have lost an incredibly cost-effective way to nourish particularly the world's poor. So we had a discussion today with a group of students, and we talked about the fact that we have a wonderful message when it comes to the impact of GMO on the environment. Hugely positive and measurable in billions of BTUs. What we don't have is an effective messenger and a way of packaging that message in a way that has more emotional context. And so if you would like to become one of those messengers, and I hope most of us would, that I think it's work that if we don't do, we'll fail on both fronts. We will not have affordable food. We'll have a greater impact on the world's landmass, and our greenhouse gas footprint will actually expand. Thanks.
Hi, my name is Cheryl Cropper. I have a question about, if we're opening up trade and more for all over the world, how do we implement parameters of food safety and making sure that we have, if we have a recall, how do we adapt to where that's coming from, and how do we, like, what kind of policies do we need to implement for that type of a problem?
Yep. I think, in a word, we have to share our technology with who will ever accept it. The second is we need to work diligently, and I'm proud of maybe some of the Cargill people in this room that have worked on the codex are here to get a global standard so that people have confidence not just in one country's system, but in a global system of food exchange. But it really starts with the student body on this campus. It starts with a program that we've had, this is the 5th year, where we bring 25 mid-level food regulatory people from China. We take them to the FAO in Rome. We take them to Brussels to see how they do food safety and food monitoring. In Europe, we bring them to DC and meet with the USDA and FDA, and then we take them, to Michigan State to teach them best laboratory practices. But those kinds of things done by Cargill and other companies will slowly but surely populate the world with people that share an understanding of the regulatory processes that are needed and also the laboratory and scientific processes needed to do it. Then what we're left with is we just need the political will to do it. I believe it can be done. It's a big challenge. The other comment I would make is too often I see something described as a food safety problem, which is pure and simply criminal adulteration of food. And we have to be very careful to separate those two and to say XYZ, the melamine problem in China, that was not a food safety problem. That was criminal adulteration, and that should be treated by states' attorneys and prosecutors, not by all of us. But for people that wish to do the right thing, we need to enable them scientifically and policy-wise. If you're going to get in that area, you're going to have job security.
Hi, my name is Abigail Agnew. You spoke a bit about developing markets in your lecture. I was wondering if you could speak to what effects you expect these markets to have on sustainable food production in the future, paying specific attention to Africa, given Cargill's current involvement in the area.
Yep. So to talk a little bit about Africa, that 65% of the world's arable land, which we define as not part of a rainforest that has sufficient rainfall patterns and adequate rainfall patterns to grow a 120-day crop. There's some other factors, including the slope of the land and issues like that. 65% of the undeveloped land that meets all those criteria is in Africa. And so the natural opportunity for Africa is enormous. The regulatory and government processes that are in place in Africa at this time in terms of personal property rights, the ability to use land as collateral, and most importantly, the amount of off-farm income. It is impossible to have well-to-do, prospering farmers in a country of poor people. And I meet with a lot of groups, many of them NGOs and many of them well-meaning charities, and they said, how do we have sustainable agriculture? And I always say, non-farm income. And they give you the black Labrador look. But if you take nothing else from the lecture, the best way we can help Africa is to help raise their non-farm GDP, and I rest every night knowing that agriculture will quickly follow if the prices are adequate and the depth of demand is there, which can only come from rising urban incomes. African farmers have all the natural tools to do what needs to be done, and the technology can be disseminated from this very university to get that done, but we need adequate non-farm income to make it truly sustainable and not based on philanthropy. Thanks, Abigail.
So in your speech, you gave a little bit of information about 90% of the money that we're spending right now deals with subsidies, and then about 10% of the spending that we have deals with research. What are some of the tools that you think that we can use to move closer to meeting these goals of free trade and greater yields? Do you think it's research or global education, or what are some of your ideas on that?
Okay. So do you want to talk about the 90 and 10 first? Okay. So I think the issue on 90 and 10% is just to continue to raise it. I think it's underappreciated, and that it's not to disparage any one technology, but there is a competition for a finite amount of resources in any economy, and if we spend the high percentage of it on things that we know cannot work simply because we need electricity that can be dispatched at any moment, not simply certain times of day or under certain other climatic conditions. And so we need to change that mix. I don't know what the exact number is, but taking 90% of what's being directed towards a more carbon-free economy in the developed world and to spend it on subsidies for things that demonstrably won't solve the entire problem, and just a small slice is the issue. The second part on clearly we need to continue to do research, but I would assert that we can feed 9 billion people with 5 billion of them earning more than $10 a day, which is the food industry's definition of middle class. And we could do that without inventing any additional new technologies. It's simply the deployment more uniformly across the globe of what we've already invented. Given that we're never going to have absolutely uniform deployment, we need to continue to improve in the places that have the capital and the human capabilities and the entrepreneurship that will deploy great ideas sooner, and hopefully others will emulate. So I am not here to advocate for shutting down research, but we could feed ourselves with today's technology perfectly deployed. Since that's not going to happen, we better invent.
And do you mind if I ask a follow-up? You talk about the importance of getting political action on these things. And when we look at like the last two Congresses that they've had and the very little legislation that they've passed, what is the manner that you found most effective of engaging lawmakers to take action on such issues?
Sheer terror. I think in 2012 we became very close to frightening ourselves into the quality of discussion that will ultimately come to pass.
My name is Keith Mitnich. With the current drought issue that's in California, has there been any initiative for Cargill on mitigating the risk?
So we have businesses in California that are clearly impacted by this. We have a beef processing plant in Fresno that's clearly dependent on the dairy industry staying in California. I talked with a student that's here today from California whose family ranch is depopulated by 50% to deal with the adverse pasture conditions. Those things all backfeed onto Cargill. So we have attempted to be a bit of a voice, but clearly it's an issue that's complicated by ancient water rights and a host of issues. I think in California, there's going to have to become an acceptance that some of the things that are done here in Kansas already in terms of monitoring the amount of water drawn from wells, in taking a collective approach to groundwater versus a first come, first served. And so we have been an advocate for some of those structural policies around the governance of water in California. Given the number of people that wish to live there and the nature of high value commodities, wine, raisins, pistachios, almonds, I think at some point the allocation of water simply by ancient heredity to the production of sugar beets or rice or export alfalfa, which all still continue to exist, is probably going to have to be addressed in most likely some system of pricing water and compensating those people. But if you were king for a day in California, I think you'd want to assign a value to water simply for the reason of getting the best mix of crops to maximize the GDP and the income of agriculture and to treat fairly the people that wish to be employed in those businesses. But business as usual, I can't envision in a world with more volatile moisture patterns and potentially incremental warming that you can continue with the current legal framework that surrounds water in California and make it work. That doesn't answer your questions, what Cargill's done about it. Not enough, I think would be the best answer.
Folks, I see one more question over there and 3 over here, and we'll stop to that. So let's go over here.
Hi, I'm Khaki Joe Lamoine. Climate change has been shown in part to occur as a result of building greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. A report released by the UN in 2009 states that 51% of greenhouse gas emissions are due to animal agriculture alone. If climate is the problem we are facing affecting food production, is the future of meat production secure from a sustainability aspect?
No, if the 51% stands the test of science, then I think that will be a challenge. I don't happen to accept it, but I have read it.
Thank you.
It just doesn't make sense that that you look at the amount of, we're coming up on 4 billion tons of coal burned in China. It's 8 billion tons of carbon dioxide. It's just implausible to me as an accounting graduate. But the point that you raise is a really good one, which is it's one thing to have this discussion in the presence of good facts. It's another thing to let ourselves be labeled or described with facts that we don't fully support. And so I'm afraid the next person waiting to answer is going to be an expert in this subject. But it does not seem practicable for me that we could represent 51% of the total greenhouse gases in the world and not come in for criticism. That was your specific question, and that was the specific answer. Further, I don't believe it's the case. But we need to demonstrate that to the consumers that are going to make these decisions.
Yeah, thank you for being here, Mr. Page.
You're welcome.
My name is Lowell Bliss. You know, I think if the Koch brothers heard that Tom Steyer was quoted from the stage at McCain Auditorium, K-State might lose a whole different set of funding. And so my question
My brother rescinded my invitation to Thanksgiving dinner, so I don't care about the Kochs. No, I actually do.
My question is, what has been your experience with working across such a broad political spectrum for the sake of the common good, and how can a place like K-State be a place where these peaceable and productive conversations can take place?
Yep. It's a great question. It is the question that first we have to have the science and we have to have the message, and then we need to have the place to deliver it. We need to convene the audiences that can actually make a difference. We can't just speak to ourselves or to like-minded people. So I think what we are looking for are people that are inherently, as an institution and as individual scientists and communicators, seen as agnostic. That so often I read stories, and the first thing is to disparage the scientist who's making the assertion because of some hint that the research was funded by a corporation or that there was some motive other than the pure pursuit of science that led to the conclusions. And I think whether it's in the way we fund basic research having to change, but we have to get past the point of impugning the work, or we'll continue just to have these dueling dismissals of what I think in many cases have been very well done scientific work simply because who took money from their own pocket to pay for the work to be done by an honorable scientist?
Hi, my name is Anna Heckert. My question is, considering that modern agriculture has evolved over the past 100 years under a fairly stable climate system, and that companies like Cargill have invested a multitude of funds and research to figure out how we are going to feed the world in the next 35 years, extrapolated past these well-researched 35 years, do you believe that climate change over the next 85 or even 135 years could potentially and or eventually lead to a food system collapse?
Didn't know you had a law school here. We talked today in one of the meetings we had about, somebody asked a similar question, what's the great stay awake at night question? And I think you have phrased it in a better way. That's a dig on the person that asked me this afternoon, but the question is the right one, and I think we have to contemplate that. And the big fear I have is what we've seen in the last 50 years. Eastern North Dakota, we get 2 inches more rain. We have 9 more frost-free days. So it's been gradual, but it's been a very perceptible change. The big risk we have is if we get a step function change, because most of our adaptation and our resilience is created incrementally. And so the big risk, not even going out 135 years, is that on our path to the year 2100, that we get what we thought was going to be 25 years of change, and we get it in 3. And I think then you can have those issues. So absent a big step function change in the path that we have to trod together, I believe our capacity. But if we err on any side, it should be on the side of preparing for a more dire outcome than our 5-year projections may show. Does that mean we need to empty each and every person in Kansas bank account to do it? No, it's the how and how much that we pursue this. And in that regard, I've come to believe that without addressing the way in which we generate our electricity, a lot of what these other efforts that are being made will prove really incremental. And so the big elephant in the room is electrification and how we harness that. And we are unlikely to have battery-operated passenger airliners anytime soon. And so there is going to be an element of fossil fuel use just because of its energy density. And so the only way to make a big dent in this issue is on those things that are static, and that's electricity. So if I could wish for scientists to put more of that 20% instead of 10% into basic research, most of it would center around electric power and all the ways in which we can make that the smallest possible burden so the inevitable elements can be accommodated. Thank you.
Last question.
And I hope to see what happens in 135 years. You knew that.
Hi, Mr. Page. I'm Garrett Glanzer.
Hi, Gary.
Garrett.
Garrett. Okay, excuse me.
It's all right. I was going to ask, knowing methane is one of the bigger contributors to greenhouse gases, has Cargill or the world's kind of figured any ideas to reduce the methane production by livestock or lakes and water, by creating it into methanol?
Yes.
Or the reduced fossil fuels also?
Yep. So Cargill started a number of years ago converting all of its beef processing plants to anaerobic digestion. And so today, our teams here believe all of our major livestock packing plants convert their biomass waste to methane gas. We burn it in our boilers in lieu of hydrocarbon fuel. Across the company, for the energy we use inside the fences of the company, we generate on our property about 14% of all of our power from biomass and renewables. On the outside of the fence, many dairies are adopting anaerobic digestion technology. The cost and the managerial difficulty of running anaerobic digesters has been improved dramatically, and that can continue. I'm sure Kansas State, and I know the Cargill Research Farm in Elk River, Minnesota, has done work on the diet that you can give to ruminants that will reduce the amount of methane that they generate. So the point I'm trying to make, this is a series of steps. All the participants in the supply chain have a role, whether it's us in our beef processing plants or dairies as they operate their business. I think the second thing, and I wish I could remember the statistics exactly, but a person at the University of Minnesota did a study, and we don't have obviously exact livestock populations on the number of buffalo that roamed the prairies, but as totally cellulosic digesters, they were enormous methane emitters. And his conclusion was that the methane footprint of today's modern agriculture, with the productivity that we've increased in terms of weight for age and a host of other things, that the amount of methane is actually not greater than it would have been 150 years ago. The third thing is, as we make progress against methane, unlike carbon dioxide, methane is actually disappearing as well. It's not just being generated, but it dissipates over time. So as we make progress, then we can go back and undo, or nature goes back and undoes some of what we've done before. But my answer is we should not be crucified on a cross of methane. I think that that's something within our power to address significantly.
Thank you.
Yep, you're welcome.
Please help me thank Greg Page. Also, one more time, please help me thank Mark Gardiner and the Gardiner family. Well, folks, that brings us to the end of the Henry C. Gardiner lecture series on global food systems. We appreciate the help of Cargill to putting this together, Mark Gardiner and his family, and thanks to all of you for coming here and being with us today. Go Cats.